Hello and welcome to ELT Under the Covers Crumbs on the Sheets, where we take a broader look at the education, learning, and teaching industry community, and we go a little bit more in depth into topics that are on our minds and have been suggested by you, our viewers. But first, introductions. I'm Neil of Team Teacher.
Hello everybody, it's Professor Rich.
Welcome to another edition of Crumbs on the Sheets. Today we are actually going to the sheets for our little discussion for today, right? Because we came across an article on BBC about AI in the classroom. And I figured this would be a really great starting point for a discussion about AI, because it's one of our favorite topics, right?
It's one of our favorite tools.
Tools and topics.
There's really a lot of things that we can talk about with this.
Yeah. Should we have a look at that art? Should we bring that article up first?
Oh, we're going to bring it up.
Yeah, bring it up, put it up, and we can kind of have a quick scan through it. So this one is basically they went into schools and they were asking students, do you use AI? The schools don't particularly use the AI. Maybe the teachers do, for like creating classes or reports and exams and stuff like that. But this one's kind of a little bit more focused on, as these students at public schools in the UK actually using AI, and it turns out that they are. And at the top here, they've got some quotes from some of the students that they've talked to.
So we can go. Through
I didn't
them.
know what the question meant, so I put it in ChatGPT and simplified it.
Just before we get into that, just a quick note.
Sure.
I think you've lived in Canada for too long. In the UK, public school actually means private school. So what we're talking about here are state schools.
Yes.
In the UK, and man, there's a lot of I've got some heavy opinions on this. Do you want to start with the quotes or heavy opinions?
Let's have a look at some of these quotes, and
all right,
that kind of maybe can inform more of the discussion from there. So they're talking about like this one. My geography assignment was due next period, so next class, and I used ChatGPT to write out the whole speech for me. You're saying it out loud. He got asked questions, but he got no clue what he was saying. Got detention. Well, it's kind of like a rookie mistake, really, because it's, he's just got him. But if they were doing that as an assignment, would he have got away with that? Is that just,
So,
because it seems like when they're talking about this that it's quite damning, but I've used ChatGPT to kind of like help with like my answers to questions, kind of give them a little bit more citations and stuff like that. And like one thing that I wanted to bring up as well is we've recently, with the Mr. Rogers React video, we had a lot of comments with that, and one of my ideas was to respond to those comments as Mr. Rogers. And I thought, well, I tried initially to do it, and I feel like I can get into his cardigan a little bit, but it still didn't quite feel him. So I would ask ChatGPT to respond to comments as Mr. Rogers, and a lot of those comments have been responded to by ChatGPT that is adopting or acting as Mr. Rogers with like bits of my guidance and stuff. And it's astonishing because people are engaging with that as a real person, and I really don't know if they're actually see that it's not us.
right,
Especially because we're kind of putting on this persona.
role playing.
Yeah.
So there's a whole load of things that people get horribly wrong with generative AI and ChatGPT.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of those misunderstandings and misuses lead to articles like this. Now, I've read this article not in huge detail, but in enough detail to get a pretty clear idea of the different sections of it and what they say in each of those
It's
sections.
a bit opinionated, right? It's not a bit
As
of an opinion
with
piece.
as with basically all reporting these days, including news reporting, it
Yeah.
is opinionated and biased. I'm not sure. Is this I think this is actually supposed to be a report, isn't it? It's, I mean, not a report. It's supposed to be a bit of an opinion piece. In fact,
Yeah.
it's a young reporter, so it's BBC Young Reporters even. So we might not expect the highest standard of things, since young reporters are not even trained as journalists, right? They're just whatever. I don't even know what age range they are. But anyway, let's talk about the misunderstandings of ChatGPT first of all. So first of all, people a lot of people seem to think that ChatGPT is supposed to be like Data from Star Trek. It's supposed to be like you say something and it comes back with its Mr. Logic response,
Hmm.
so it instantly solves all of your logical issues. And I think actually ChatGPT is kind of the opposite of that. It's like the anti-data, actually.
Hmm.
ChatGPT doesn't value logic and truth as much as other things.
Hmm.
What it does is it simulates the way that people communicate.
Hmm.
So, and it does that based on how people have communicated in the past. So it's all pattern matching, which means that logic and truth is not necessarily the highest priority because it's just based on whatever people have said and written in the past,
Hmm.
which is not necessarily Mr. Logic and truth. It's human, it's humanized. So ChatGPT is actually, it's more like a human simulator rather
Hmm.
than a super computer brain.
Yeah.
And that's where people go a bit wrong on it because they think, oh, why is it giving me the wrong answers? It's like, yeah, because humans give you the wrong answers all the time,
Yeah.
right? That's reality. That's how really the world works. I mean, if we ever do create a computer which is just 100% true, then we've almost created like a god machine, haven't we? It's
Yeah,
like
but
it's something almost outside of our conception.
to expand on that as well, it's becoming more and more apparent, well, for me, that this idea of what is true can be very fluid and can also there there's so much context and balance between uh you know facts, like they could there's a truth to one side of the argument, truth to the other, and it's generally kind of like an in between. So when it to spit out 100% fact, it's kind of like, is that even possible? But it's
Yeah,
only and it's generally only possible within that specific moment, because if you then
yeah.
go 5 years in the future, especially if you're talking about something that's science based, or a decade in the future, even like history, whatever, then that gets revised and it's always changing,
Unfortunately, that is
and that's just
that
life.
seem that seems to be the truth,
Yeah.
and this has led to some horrendous and pervasive academic theories such as postmodernism,
Hmm.
which is basically the idea that there is actually no, it's not only that we don't know objective truth, but actually there is no objective truth. Everything is constructed at a subjective level, which means it's all cultural context, it's all subjective experience, it's all interpretation. And we better hope that that's not actually the case,
I really do.
because if
Yeah.
you let the postmodernists run riot, then you just end up with absolute chaos. So even for pragmatic reasons, we should at least assume that some things are more true than others.
Yeah.
But anyway,
One
getting back
plus
to the
one is
point,
two. Yeah. I think we
let's
can
hope.
go with that. Hopefully.
Yeah. I think someone did do some proofs of that where they showed that it might not sometimes, but what we
I
can
had one
what
kid at school that said cheekily 1 + 1 is 11, and I was like, "That's smart. I see what you're doing there." I didn't really have an argument for against it. I was like, "Yeah, it's not math, but that's clever. Well done."
I think a stronger truth than 1 + 1 is 2 is to say that a triangle always has 3 sides. So can you imagine a triangle without 3 sides? And I don't know, someone's probably even dived into that. But anyway, let's get back to this. So this is about misunderstandings. So there's a lot of misunderstandings with ChatGPT, first of all. So then we get this quote. It says, a geographical assignment was due next period, which makes me think it's American because the British students say period.
Yeah,
And
that's
I
why
used,
I said next class. Weird.
yeah, ChatGPT to write out the whole speech for me. When I was saying it out loud and I got asked questions, I had no idea what I was saying. I got a detention. So there's a few things which I think are weird about this. Okay. So first of all, I don't think that anyone should be teaching people to give presentations reading word from word by word from a script. I don't think that's the correct way to give a presentation. And I think that when you watch really great presenters, they don't memorize word for word what they're going to say. They do it a different way with a bit of improvisation. And you can see they have moments where they kind of check in and think for a minute, and then they come back and start talking, right? Really great presenters tend to do that rather than just having a word for word delivery. That's more of a politician than giving a presentation. So I don't really know why someone's doing that in the classroom. It's not the way that I teach people to give presentations. What's the point in teaching people how to act and read out loud from a script? Well, I mean, there are points to that actually, but not in terms of giving presentations. So first of all, I disagree with that pedagogy. Then we get this thing that said, I got questions. I had no clue what I was saying, so I got detention. So we all know if you fire things into ChatGPT, especially 3.5, it will give you a very extensive answer full of kind of overly flowery language. I don't know if you've noticed
Fluff,
that.
filler, yeah, I know what you mean.
3.5 is especially guilty of it. Like it will just spray out very flowery, fluffy language, and it sounds, you can spot it a mile off. You can spot that it's GPT because of that. With 4.0, you can tell it to write in different styles, and it's much more difficult. But with 3.5, it'll do that. So first of all, yeah, that would be recognizable. But then he says, I got asked questions. I had no idea what I was saying, and I got a detention. So I got asked questions, and he didn't have an answer for that. But, I mean, people actually genuinely do the research and then get asked questions and don't have an answer for it. So I don't really see that as a test on the part of the teacher, but maybe he admitted to using ChatGPT or something like that. And that's when he got the detention. So, and that's the point actually where I disagree the most with this. Teachers shouldn't be giving students detention for using ChatGPT. I'm sorry, it's there. They're going to use it. You can't stop them. Deal with it. It is there. So the idea that you can say, don't use this amazing tool to do this thing because I want to synthetically grade you using it, that's not going to happen. Because let's imagine, for example, that you were asked by the United Nations to give a compelling speech on a subject that you're kind of an expert on. Like, of course you're going to use ChatGPT to help you write that speech. Why the hell wouldn't you? Like, it will definitely, if anything, at the very basic level, at least you could write the speech, put it into ChatGPT and say, how will people react to this? What advice do you have? Of course you're going to use it. It's an amazing tool. It's so powerful. So why the hell would you expect your students not to use it? Why create a synthetic task where you're like, oh, you're not allowed to use ChatGPT, you have to do it yourself? Well, the only reasonable answer, or the primary reasonable answer that a teacher might have to that is say, well, I'm using this as a form of assessment. So the presentation is not actually the point, which in my opinion, it should be the point, but it might not be. They might see it as not the point, But the point is, I want the student to demonstrate that they've done the work and they understand the topic.
Yeah.
If that's the case, then use a different form of assessment.
Yeah.
Because this form of assessment is compromised. It is compromised. It's kind of like...
That's the point. That's the point. I was about to push back on you and say, well, how do they know that this kid has actually wrote anything? And I think that is the point. It's about being able to assess them accurately, and doing presentations, writing assignments nowadays, I think it's out the window.
Yeah. For assessment.
Unless it's been done in the classroom and it's been monitored.
Yeah.
Then, yeah, what are you going to do? And sorry, you were just about to get into that.
Oh, you put your hand up. Sorry, I didn't see that.
Oh,
was that you waiting to get in?
No, I didn't know.
Oh, you actually
I didn't know.
You did it like
just
that,
did that naturally.
How do we get rid of that?
I love AI. It's already a setting on there. You'd have to go in, but sorry. What do you? I cut in. What were you saying? What assessment were you going to suggest, or did you have in mind?
Well, it's a tricky one, but I definitely have some assessments in mind. So, first of all, from my perspective, actually, I think if you're going to do something like this where ChatGPT can be used, then actually you should encourage it, and you should train the students how to use it. Mm-hmm. Now, the teachers who are using this lazily for assessment and are giving kids detention for using ChatGPT are going to hate you, because you're actually going to be the teacher who trains them how to use it in a way that those teachers won't be able to tell that the other students are using ChatGPT. Yeah. So they're going to really dislike that. But hey, you come into the 22nd century, boys. It's time for it's ChatGPT time. So first of all, you could actually be assessing someone's capability to use ChatGPT, in which case, which presentation sounds natural and which one sounds like it was written by AI. And then you start assessing that. But you need to explicitly tell the students that that's what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of changing the assessment, one thing you could do is that rather than saying a presentation, what you can say is, we're going to have a discussion on this subject. Mm. And you don't go any further than that, right? So, what was his a geography assignment? So you can say, right, we're going to discuss the formation of volcanoes, and you'll be assessed on your display of knowledge. And also you could have a load of soft skills in the assessment. So it could be like display of knowledge, communication and collaboration, rationalization, critical thinking, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. You'd have to have some sort of a mark schema. So you treat it kind of like an oral exam, mm-hmm. is basically what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that would be my workaround for a more authentic assessment of the student's understanding.
Take my money. I want this schema.
The thing that is a little bit worrying is that, well, I mean, it depends how futurist you want to get about it, but one day, even that's going to be a problem, because we're going to start getting to cyborg zone where people have like
something
Google
in their noggin,
not necessarily
or glasses, or like an earpiece or something.
I think if you actually go for the chip in the brain, I'm sorry, I'm a technophile, but I'm not going to have a chip in my brain. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I don't know. Maybe you could convince me, but I wouldn't.
Just put it on my nuts.
Well, that's one of the things, though, man. I mean, imagine, what is the thing that you absolutely enjoy the most ever in your entire life? What's the best experience you've ever had?
Chips on my nuts.
If you imagine that you could actually plug a chip into your brain and just push a button and get that experience, like every single time, yeah, it's definitely going to be an issue. It's going to be like worse than crack cocaine, isn't it? But anyway. One day we will, at the very least, have the Google contact lens, mm-hmm. and then you won't even know. Yeah. You won't even. I mean, I guess we'll start scanning people to see if they've got the Google contact lens. But then there is kind of it gets back to my pragmatic argument, which is, why the hell are we testing people in a situation that's not authentic? It's kind of like when in the 90s, when they were saying, oh, you can't use a calculator in your maths exam. Mm-hmm. it was ridiculous, and they changed it before I did my A levels. When I did my A level maths,
Yeah.
you needed a calculator, and they actually recommended, and it wasn't just a normal calculator. It's one of those ones
The
with all of the buttons
graphics.
and
Yeah.
programs and
Yeah.
all kinds on it,
Yeah.
right? So they actually insisted that you have one. So the thing completely changed, and that is how we have to adapt to our assessment now. It's not a question of don't use ChatGPT. Actually, what we should be saying is, right, part of the assignment is use ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're realistically going to get into accessibility issues here. I've never,
I'm not sure about that though.
I've never known a student not to have a smartphone, and I'm currently teaching homeless asylum seekers.
No,
Right?
I mean in the case
Oh,
of 3.5 and 4.
that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true. But that's true. That is true, and that's an unfortunate unfairness, actually.
So we
That's really
everyone's
tricky.
got access to the internet, right? And doesn't the UN say that it's a basic human right at this point? So at what
Yeah, which is a
point
bit weird.
does ChatGPT become basic human right to have the most up to date version and should be free for
That's
everybody?
That's a tough question. I think that it would come down to the schools, particularly with the state schools. I think that the schools, and I think OpenAI in this case, OpenAI should have education licenses.
Yeah.
The schools should buy the licenses, and the licenses should cover all the students. So
Yeah.
all students should be able to go on, and that would be quite good actually, because first of all, that would allow you to monitor use.
Mm.
So you could actually say, as part of this assignment, you must use ChatGPT, but you must use, if you've got a personal account, please don't use that for the assignment. Use the school account, because then you can actually grade the ChatGPT chat as well.
Okay,
So
and I do have another accessibility issue as well. Okay, so to use ChatGPT to do an assignment like that, you have to have a level of language ability, written, reading, stuff like that. So there are going to be kids that have come from, I don't know, say neglectful backgrounds where their level, say they're all in, I don't know, year 8, but their level of language use is a year or two below for whatever reason, and they've not caught up yet they are doing the same kind of, like, they're in the same class as other kids that are at the correct level, and they are being asked to use ChatGPT. One of their tools, as in the language that they have to input, is not at the same level as their peers. So I don't know how you correct for that. Can you give them a graded ChatGPT? You know what I mean?
no, personally, I wouldn't correct for that. I think that's just part of the assessment. I understand that some people learn slower than others or at different levels or whatever, but I think that the assessment is incorporating those kinds of communication skills into it. It's kind of like if your assessment was how many slam dunks can you score in a basketball game, then the kids who have grown taller are going to have an advantage.
Yeah.
That's life. So I just see that, unfortunately, as part of the assessment. Now, how we cope with that in terms of giving those kids support to help them catch up, that's different. I mean, yeah, maybe you could have extra classes, maybe, and they already do. If someone's literacy skills are lagging behind, then you can have extra after school classes and stuff to help them get up to speed. And ChatGPT would actually help improve literacy skills anyway.
Yeah, I just think it was a pertinent point to just throw in there as well. But
yeah,
I
mean,
think
and
you've completely got that covered.
It is a big issue these days, isn't it? Accessibility and things like that. And what about students with no arms? Can they still use ChatGPT? They'll need voice recognition. Okay, what about students that are mute and have no arms? Okay, well, they need some sort of Stephen Hawking style thing. It's like, yeah, you go through these things, and we can be as accessible as we can.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, yeah, it is part of the assessment, I think. And there is natural unfairness in these things.
That's
there's
life, bud.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of unfairness right now, because which is in favor of me, and I don't know if you feel like this as well. You've been working in tech for a while now.
Yep.
like I'm all about tech, and ChatGPT for me, like I feel like I feel like a fish in the ocean.
Yeah.
It's like, so it's like I was a fish in a puddle before, and now someone's just thrown me in the ocean. I'm like, yeah, I know this. This is no problem. Whereas it's like I can see a lot of the other teachers, they're more like a cat in the ocean.
Yeah.
Right? And like, I don't want to go in the ocean. I want to go in the ocean, right? How does this thing work? How does it work? And there's water going everywhere. So it's unfair. And people like me and you can offer workshops and training seminars on that, which is something that I've been doing with teachers at the moment. And actually, I initially thought that they would get it a lot quicker. It's kind of funny. I don't know if you can share this experience, but constantly with ChatGPT, I've been surprised at how underwhelming other people have seemed to think it is. Like, I kind of keep going like, yeah, but look. And they're like, oh, yeah, I suppose. Oh, well, oh, yeah, yeah. And then they just don't use it. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, have you seen that? I find that bizarre. Like, as far as I'm concerned, I'm still discovering the magic that this thing can do and how it can save me time and improve things and do new things. And I'm still discovering tricks and intricacies and all kinds that are blowing my mind.
No, it
Whereas
keeps it keeps
some
getting
people
more.
are just,
Like now that it assesses your pictures and is about to get voice prompts and stuff like that. It's like, okay, for example, um, I've been playing around with AI generated art like Mid Journey,
yeah,
and that in ChatGPT, you've got to have that art of writing prompts, kind of, and Midjourney has the same. If you want to create an art, you've got to talk about it in certain ways, what to include, the weight, the style. Do you want it to be what kind of quality? You have all these parameters that you give it, and then it creates something. And I was using it for with reference images, and I was trying to describe the reference images, and then it occurred to me, ChatGPT can do that for me. So I put my reference image into ChatGPT, ask it to describe it, and then I use that description along with other parameters and put that into the AI art, and voila, it's closer to what I was wanting than the description that I was trying to make, because
yeah,
it kind of picked up on those details where I didn't think that they were important, but maybe they added whatever. But like, that was just something that just occurred to me, and I was like, wow,
yeah,
this is now an amazing new tool that I have,
yeah.
and yeah, and it's just another use for this thing. Yeah, it's
Yeah, I mean,
incredible.
as an avid gamer, I'm so excited for what they're going to do with video games with this thing. Like, can you imagine like playing like a role-playing adventure game or something, and you're talking to a character and it's using generative AI to respond? So you can literally just say anything to this character and it will respond in world, lore friendly, in a completely like it's like role playing with people,
Yeah.
but in a video game.
Well, I
It's
mean, they
going
were
to be
like
really
pushing for that.
incredible.
I remember that video game Fable. Where you your actions determined on if you become a bad guy or a good guy, or the responses. And I think there was like a Lord of the Rings game that had like an AI enemy, a nemesis AI, that would follow you. And like, if you beat them and you were nice to give them mercy, they would remember that, and then that would impact future interactions. But
Yeah.
like, I think of when like these video games, it would be like doing The Hobbit. You would go and they would come up. You're dealing with Gollum, and he would come up with a riddle based on you and that
Yes.
lore and
Yes.
stuff like that, and it's all
Exactly.
personalized. And
Yes.
you would actually have to think when you're doing video games, because a lot of video
Yeah.
games you can kind of just go onto the internet, read a guide, and be like, oh, what
Right.
question do I have
You
to?
can't predict it with
Yeah,
generative AI. Yeah, and also they'll be able to really well adapt to people's playing styles. So the difficulty can be tailored just to get that level that's just a bit more difficult than what you can handle. So it's always kind of a challenge.
yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be very exciting in terms of entertainment. But anyway, but to get back to the point that
Mm.
started on this thread, is that a lot of people still don't seem to recognize the utility. And instead, what they do is they recognize a danger, and they're really focusing on the danger. And I think we see this in this article. Like, it seems very much that they focus on the danger. There are some positives here. So he said, I don't know what the question meant, so I put it in ChatGPT and it's just simplified it. Yeah, okay, that's great. When you're doing homework, there's no teacher in the classroom. It's like a teacher when you're at home. Fantastic. That is brilliant, isn't it? Using AI to teach you stuff. I'll tell you what, ChatGPT has taught me all kinds of stuff.
Yeah,
Like
and that's what we've kind of
love.
been looking into, right? Where us thinking about coming up with an AI teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if so, us listening out there, we've got a whole bunch of ideas around that that we're working on. Get in touch.
I see it's more like a teacher's assistant, or a supplementary device, but it's definitely something that people should be using. But I mean, I've used it in all kinds of different ways educationally. So to give some examples, I've been kind of studying a lot about theology recently, and the history of certain religions, particularly Christianity and to some extent Buddhism, and different ways that I've used that. One way, I asked ChatGPT to take the personality of the Apostle Paul and then asked it questions about his experiences and so on. I don't know if you know much about this, but one of the interesting things about Paul is that he never physically met Jesus. He was someone who had a vision and then wrote 7 out of the 15 books of the New Testament.
Right.
So he wrote half of the New Testament without ever physically meeting Jesus.
Okay.
He was just a Jew who had a vision of Jesus after he died, and then went and met one of the other apostles, and then wrote half of the New Testament.
Okay.
So quite an interesting character, and also he said some things which in theology people get very spicy about. For example, he's the one who said women shouldn't teach religion.
Right.
Just
okay.
That's it, right? And this is the word of the Lord, right?
Oh, so did you ask him to expand on that or something?
Well, I said, like, where does that come from, and what is it? And it was really interesting, yeah, because obviously ChatGPT defends it and justifies it from that perspective of, I had the vision, and the word of God came to me through visions and experiences, and I wrote the word of the Lord. So it really gives you that perspective. So it is really interesting. Another thing I did is I asked it to become San Juan de la Cruz, right, who was a contemplative Christian monk from the 13th century, who basically meditated and prayed until he experienced God. And there are comparisons between him and the kind of Buddhist conception of enlightenment.
Yeah.
So what he thought of as God is what the Buddhists would think of as enlightenment, nirvana, and so on. So I basically spoke to him about Buddhism. I asked him, what does he think about Buddha? And he came with it from a Christian perspective. What Buddhists consider the middle way or the right path, he considered the path of Jesus, and this kind of stuff. So I find stuff like that super interesting and incredibly educational. But it's so interesting as well because you engage with it in this conversational manner. And as humans, we love to do that. So it's just such a powerful educational tool. The possibilities there are many. I don't want to say endless. It's such a cliche, but there's a lot of possibilities. And I really think that anyone who's an avid learner should be using it. And you think, but maybe it's not true. Maybe it's making stuff up. Yeah, of course it's making stuff up. I mean, of course, the actual Apostle Paul wouldn't say word for word what that thing said. It's just guessing. But that doesn't matter. It's still fun and interesting and useful. I mean, people have been doing this kind of stuff with actors role-playing historical figures for ages. And no one's been like, but maybe it's going to be fake, so we shouldn't use it. No, it's fun and interesting and kids like it. And okay, everything might not be 100% true. So what? It'll teach them to be critical thinkers. You shouldn't bloody believe anything that anyone tells you 100% anyway. You should always always trust yourself and try to verify the information that someone's saying, whether they're your teacher, whether they're a fucking professor, or whether they're the government minister of health, right? It doesn't bloody matter what they are, whether they have 10 PhDs or whatever. I'll decide if I think it's true. And that's what I think my students should do as well. They use critical thinking. So
what is, but that's the problem. And that's what I kind of come to with ChatGPT and the danger with misinformation, which is a really broad thing that I've not quite got a good definition for yet. But basically the idea of the essential, what is truth? What do you know? Because when you think about critical thinking, you can, I wholeheartedly agree with you, but like critical thinking to find the truth. So what are the parameters for the critical thinking to find the truth? We know it with a scientific method. So, we can say, is it, you have a hypothesis, you test it, and then multiple other people test it, and we keep doing that over long periods of time and we kind of see, okay, this is generally, we can say that this is kind of a little bit more concrete, a little bit more fact, right? So that's why we can say, like a lot of the stuff with physics, maths, we're good with that they're facts. They might change. There'll be like different instances. Okay. And then we kind of go into, but then, if we're going to kind of skirt with religion, like you go into you've got evolution. It seems we've done a lot of scientific method with this. We've done a lot of testing, and it seems to be that there was evolution is a thing, and that's the likely where we came from, right? But there's also creationism, where it's a vision from God. Now, how can we apply the scientific method to that? So, but then how does that interact with critical thinking? And how do you keep those two at the same time?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the answer. I'm just kind of like putting out the questions there, because it seems to be very, what is, you can say critical thinking, but then there has to be, well, what is correct? And is it a correct for a specific kind of physical thing in reality? And is there a separate thing? I'd be fine with creationism taught as a humanities. Maybe not so much as a science, because for me, science, I think, testable, provable.
Creationism definitely cannot be taught as a science. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah,
because it's not testable by the scientific method.
But they're conflicting.
Well, the thing is, the thing is, Neil, there's a,
and then you kind of go, well, where's the critical thinking for that? And for me, it would be like, well, it kind of makes sense for the person to say, well, we could prove it, so critically thinking, we would go more with the evolution. But then I really understand the opposite side of it,
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. I mean, there's first of all, the issue that you're talking about, and the what you're struggling with, is very well known by philosophy.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's the problem of knowledge, justification, and doubt, but specifically knowledge, which is what are the things that we can know to be true? And then we talk about, and also truth. What is truth, right? So you have the ultimate skeptic position, which is, I can't know any single thing to be true, because even my perceptions could deceive me, and even my mental faculties could deceive me. And that gets you to Descartes' famous conclusion of, I think, therefore I am, which is he's saying the only thing I know to be true is that I exist. And also that I'm a thing that exists and has thoughts, because I know that I have thoughts. But then everything else I don't know to be true. And Descartes' controversial solution for that is, the only way you can know anything else to be true is to have faith that there's a benevolent God that is assuring that our experience makes some kind of sense rather than being a deception of an evil demon. That's Descartes' rather controversial. I believe a mutual friend of ours, Mr. Weston, referred to it as what did he say? He said it's like a good porn video, but without the what do they call that bit at the end of porn? The something shot.
Cum shot, money
Yeah,
shot.
the money shot. Yes, that's it. Without the money shot. Yeah, yeah. So
Vinegar face.
basically, there's this idea that Descartes' book is he makes a lot of very compelling arguments about skepticism of everything,
Yeah.
but then his conclusion doesn't convince too many people. Although he was religious, so actually it makes sense for him to go to that conclusion, because otherwise he's just got to a point where he no longer has any ground to stand on at all. The only thing he's got are these two rather useless facts. And then people have expanded on that, and they've said things like the three-sided triangle. All triangles have three sides. We know that to be true, no matter what. But then these other things, you see, you're getting onto stuff like I mean, even if we say the theory of gravity, or not the theory of gravity, if we say gravity, right? For gravity, we have a number that determines, like, we can predict the acceleration of objects due to the force of gravity. We can do all this stuff like that, right? But, you know, if you go back to Descartes, you could say, well, all of that could still be some sort of a deception. Or it could just be, for example, that every single observation we've made so far conforms to that by chance. And the next one is going to be the one that defies it. And suddenly the pen flies that way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's almost impossible and doesn't seem to make sense. So then we have to go towards pragmatism, right?
Yeah.
So pragmatism is the idea of, look, we have to live in this bloody world, whether we can 100% prove everything to be true or not. So what we want to do then is decide that what is pragmatic to believe to be true, right? We're not going to say 100% that things are true, but we're going to say that for all pragmatic purposes, we can say that approximately it's true, so it's useful to think about, right? And then you definitely have a scale. It's absolutely not a binary, which is where things get very muddy, because then we're talking about, well, what's a science and what's not a science, right? And also, even there's a question of the truth of science versus the truth of not science, because there are definitely things which defy science. And which science has been unable to explain, continues to be unable to explain, and may in the future, maybe one day, we will get scientific explanations of things. But even then, you have to consider, is that the whole truth?
And to add on to that, if we were to run the world based on science and only science, we would be making some crazy ass decisions. You know, because we would go something like, okay, we want to reduce violence. We want to eliminate violence. You look at science, you look at the data, you know, I think they might come to a conclusion that we might just be wanting to eliminate men, or at least significantly reduce the amount of testosterone that they have, you know, to take away aggressive tendencies, you know, you kind of see where I'm going with that. And, you know, there's other instances where you would go, well, that doesn't make sense. You know, like old people, you get, it reminds me of that Bill Hicks thing, you know, where he's like, you know, they get to a certain age and you're like, well, do you want grandma to, you know, die in a home, or do you want to be a stunt double in like an action movie or something like that?
Do you want her to meet Chuck Norris?
Yeah. You know, so but where you kind of look at the physical body of the an older person, you might say, well, they've not really got much utility physically anymore. They're not contributing, you know, economically to society. So, you know, do we just do a Logan's Run? But then no, you go, well, no, they contribute in different ways. You can't just look it through this one prism, right? So I see where you're going. You know, like it's you have to have that pragmatism, but how you do that with truth, and how that's presented via AI, I don't know.
Rationality, if you're purely rational, it can lead to horrendous consequences.
Yes.
There's absolutely no doubt about that. I mean, we can talk about things like genetic defects. Should people with genetic diseases and defects be allowed to reproduce? You
Yeah.
know, you get those kind of questions, and rationality has rather alarming answers to those questions if we're purely rational about it. So obviously, the whole truth from a human perspective cannot be answered purely rationally, which means that science has a bit of a problem because science has to be, the scientific method is based on rationality. Now, to go to another a point, which is a separate point, a little bit nuanced about what you were saying about evolution, right?
Mm-hmm.
You said evolution is true. Well, this is the thing about evolution. There are a lot of misconceptions about what evolution is and what it's claiming,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like people, I'm not a scientist, not my specialty, but from my understanding, a lot of people seem to think that evolution is a process of random cell mutation, and the cell mutations which are successful in terms of survival strategy are the ones that proliferate, right?
Right.
But actually, as far as I'm aware, the scientifically proven part of evolution doesn't actually go that far. Basically, evolution is that there's some sort of process of beings changing over time,
Mm-hmm.
and random cell mutation is part of that.
Mm-hmm.
But there are questions. For example, is there some sort of directed part of it? Like, let's say, for example, that we all, we move our families to the Antarctic, right? And me and you live in the Antarctic for 20 years, and then we have 5 kids.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a greater possibility that our
With our
kids,
wives, so because that's not possible between us two. Sorry.
hey, you don't know what ChatGPT is capable of, Neil. But anyway, obviously you haven't experimented it with in the same ways as me. So, so the point that I wanted to get to is that if we were in, if we, let's say 20 years ago we moved to the Antarctic, stayed there for 20 years, and then had 5 kids,
Mm-hmm.
would those kids have a greater possibility of having some sort of minor cell mutation or gene mutation that enabled them to survive better in those conditions? That, I think, is a very interesting question. And I don't think that's been answered by science or whether that's incorporated into evolution. The question being, is it entirely random or not? We don't actually know that because
Well,
actually,
it's the way I see it. It's not just cell mutations. It's a whole bunch of factors. Like dynamics between these. The living organisms that whatever you're referring to, environments. It's kind of like when you're talking about kids. Parents have there's the nature nurture, but that it's not even just nature nurture, because you've also got to factor in schools, their dynamics with their friends, their environment, the country that they're in, the continent they're in, the
right, but I'm
environment.
talking
It's a whole
I'm
bunch.
talking about biology though.
Yeah.
I'm talking about biological genetic differences, right?
Yeah.
So I'm saying, are those genetic differences entirely determined randomly and by natural selection, or is there some sort of guiding principle which makes it not completely random, but random based within, let's say, a subset of possible parameters that are determined by the environment or genetic memory or some sort of influence or other influence, which would actually give room for, a God theory directing things. Or it could just be a natural process based on the environment.
Yeah.
For example, if I spend half my life eating spicy food, does that then make me perhaps more possible to produce a child who has a genetically implanted ability to tolerate spicy food?
Right.
Now, I don't believe that that's been proven or disproven, but if you think about, for example, skin color, skin tone, the general theory is that all humans had a dark skin tone
Yeah.
from when we came from the continent of Africa, which is actually, that's a theory which is now being challenged. They're starting to think that the African continent may not have been the origin of humanity they're
Where
often
do they
talked about.
think they came from?
There's some discussion about, well, first of all, you have to think the continents were in a different shape millions of years ago,
Right. Okay.
and there were sort of land bridges and stuff like that. So it's very difficult to say that, there was a bunch of kind of humanoid, like big-brained apes in Africa, and then they kind of become smooth-skinned and whatever. I mean, what is the origin of that point anyway? It's not a binary; it's a continuum,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if it was a binary, imagine, you had a kid, and it came out and it looked like one of those little greys, those aliens.
Mm-hmm.
You'd be like, what the fuck, right? Like, surely we don't expect things to happen in this binary way like that. It has to happen over a continuum.
Yeah.
So obviously, it's more complicated than people make out. But anyway, going back to the point. So the theory is that most humans were dark skinned, and then Northern Europeans, they think quite recently actually,
Yeah.
became light skinned, because it basically turns your skin into a solar panel for vitamin D.
Yeah.
To quote Joe Rogan. So that action, is that really a random mutation that did that? Like, and they think it was within hundreds of years. So
Mm-hmm.
not that incredible. Like, something that's happened actually quite recently, right? And it was random. So how come then we don't see people born randomly with white skin, like, now? Like, surely the probability can't be that low if
Yeah, but
if it
I can
magically happened just
see.
100 years ago.
I don't think it's magically born with white skin. It's, I mean, like we've both known people with darker skin. Like Fanny's got darker skin and she's paler over here. Because she's not getting as much sun. It's just that's what happens, right? So I can see why it would be it would happen faster, because I'm seeing it within an actual generation. You move from a very sunny hot country, you go to a place where it's more cloudy, you get paler. I was darker when I was in Spain. I'm whiter when I'm over here. Your skin, there's certain amount of adaptation, right? That I think there's kind of like a certain genetic leeway that we have where we could adapt to our environment. That's what makes us so amazing. So,
Right.
but like, I don't think you're gonna go from
And
someone
you
that's
think you can,
dark skin to white skin like in one
right?
generation. But
But
progressively over
are
time.
you saying that adaptation is passed to your kids?
No, I'm saying, like, if that adaptation's not passed to your kids, they will still be lighter anyway, right? Because they're in that environment where it's cloudier. So they will be naturally paler.
Right. Okay. But I've got friends who are like as black as a moonless night,
Yeah.
and they haven't got paler living in the UK.
Yeah. But, like, that's because they're maybe black as the night. But I'm saying,
Right.
like, someone.
Yeah. So there's some kind of adaptation, but
Yeah.
the theory is that we that happened, that we went from having like that because actually, um
But we didn't go
it's,
from, like, monkeys, apes, like, that kind of, like, that hominid kind of to, medieval times or whatever. We still went through that process of going from
yeah,
really dark to olive to
yeah,
like living in the woods in
right,
Germany or whatever.
there's a spectrum. There's a spectrum, but I'm now talking about human evolution.
Yeah.
So no longer evolving from other species, but we're within the human paradigm, and we're saying that very recently within the human paradigm, white skin evolved. Now, for me to think that is due to random evolution, I find that so incredibly implausible. because there are just so many things that could randomly evolve. And they're going to say that within, sorry, I don't think it was hundreds of years, but within thousands of years, that evolution has happened within that shorter time span. Because obviously the history of the Earth is millions and millions and millions and maybe billions of years, right? And you're going to say within the last 1,000 years, suddenly humans went to Northern Europe and randomly evolved whiter skin? No, it's got to be, from my perspective, it makes a lot more sense to think there are environmental factors that somehow directed the evolution. Now, we don't know if that's true, and we don't know if it's not true, but it's an element that needs to be considered. So when you talk about something like evolution, there's still a lot of things we don't know about it, is the point I was going to get to about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's still a lot of room to talk about what evolution is and what it isn't. In other words, we don't know exactly what it is. And then you also mentioned, to go back to the earlier discussion, you also talked about physics. Physics we know is blah, blah, blah. No. What we know about physics is we have some very useful equations that seem to work out most of the time. But actually, they're all approximations. If you zoom in closer, you start to see problems, right? So, when we say, for example, that the acceleration due to gravity is 9.8 meters per second squared, obviously it's not exactly 9.8 meters per second squared. It's round about that. And then when we say, when we say, well, when we talk about waves and particles, we get into wave-particle duality. Sometimes it acts like a wave, sometimes it acts like a particle. And then you start to think, maybe it's not a wave or a particle, but just it's useful to think of it as a wave or a particle because it follows those rules. Compare it to language, when we talk about habits, we use the present simple. Okay. Yeah, you're right. Actually, that is very useful, but it's also bollocks because we also use the present simple for loads. In fact, basically you can use the present simple for fucking anything, right? But yes, the majority of the time it's used for habits or state verbs, right? So then we get this grammar rule. And I very much see things like physics, as being someone who studied A-level physics. I very much see things like physics as being quite similar to that. They are very useful approximations. And that actually is kind of what truth is. It's these very pragmatic, useful approximations. So then we need to get back to your original challenge, which was, how exactly do you teach critical thinking? What is critical thinking? Does it involve the scientific method and all that? First of all, I think that critical thinking is a subjective individual process. I don't think you can lay out an all-encompassing, this is how to be a critical thinker, because the whole point of critical thinking is that when you say that, someone could look at it and criticize it and break it down and say, actually, that doesn't work because of this. That's the point, right? It's about having some healthy skepticism about what you are told, what you learn, and basically everything. Be prepared to question and discuss anything. The downside, and the thing that a lot of people don't seem to tolerate, is that it can end up wasting a lot of time. And this is where the pragmatism comes in. Is it useful for us to spend 7 hours discussing whether we really exist or our entire perception is just the delusions created by an evil demon? Well, probably it's not really that useful. Maybe we should just accept that whether it is or not, we're living in this world now, so let's just deal with it. Maybe if in the future we both win the lottery and become billionaires and solve all the problems, then we can get to the point where, you know what, Neil, I've got nothing else to do. So why don't we deal with this evil demon possibility problem? Because now that seems like the only challenge we need to face up to. But until we get to that point, maybe we leave those discussions for the philosophers at university to have fun with and get on with kind of more pragmatic things. So it's a principle of pragmatism that critical thinking, skepticism, combined with a principle of pragmatism. And it is definitely a soft skill. It's not a method.
Mm-hmm.
So it's imbuing people with the soft skill of acting and behaving like that rather than following some step-by-step process.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm with you, especially on the time wasting part of it. You know, like we've just got it. We've just gone over like evolution for like 5 minutes. You know, maybe if not more, and neither of us are none the wiser. The information that we're both making these, that we're talking about could change. You know, like you say, 1,000 years. You know, those time periods seem to be shifting, you know, all the time with history, with new discoveries, you know, like with evolutions and Gobekli Tepe, you know, like, well, maybe we were more evolved, maybe it happened longer, you know, all the information seems to be shifting, and this idea that, you know, like us, the two laymen have to kind of put it to rights. Yeah, I mean, well, lucky we've got this kind of podcast and we can kind of go over it, but, you know, like it feels like, could we not utilize that time in a more effective manner if we've got this podcast, education, learning, teaching, to kind of bring forth that more?
No, but I think
You know what I mean?
I think it demonstrates an interesting point, and I think it's
Yeah,
an
no, I
interesting.
agree, but I'm just saying, you know, like that brings me to my next point. Is it seems like we kind of are reaching that point where it needs to be tackled, because, you know, people are making decisions in their lives, government are making legislation based on information, that's, you know, we've kind of pragmatically say, well, this is a good approximation, but then everyone's got a tool like ChatGPT where they can make really strong arguments that they might not have been able to make before, with that they can do instantly by saying, ChatGPT, assume the identity of this expert, use citation, here's my point, can you support that for me, when they wouldn't have been able to do that before. And you end up with these conflicts, and then we're like, well, where does it end us with? Where are these what did you call them, approximations, where can we land on with those? And I think that for me seems to be the danger with ChatGPT, and like the AI, is that misinformation of the idea of what is misinformation, and is there this idea of, well, if information is not correct, or it never will be correct, it will always be fluid, and we have to decide on what is the best kind of approximation that we can come up with, then what do we do with all the rest, right? Do we censor that? Because, you know, like your points on evolution might be a little bit more contrary to the mainstream, but, you know, do we, every time we want to make a legislative decision, or, you know, put something in a textbook, do we have to pander to you, or to, you know, someone else that's kind of got a little bit more of a contrarian idea on any particular given subject? And how long does that discourse have to go on for? And does that not just drag, you know, the process of where we're trying to get to, if we're trying to get to any place in particular anyway? Where does that leave us? Because we're using this repository of like ChatGPT to get information from, but, you know, use critical thinking to decide, well, is this good information or not? Then how are these kids supposed to, how long are these kids supposed to take the time to go through and sift through the information when they just want an answer to a question, you know? I don't feel like I'm verbalizing this very well, but it seems to be the thing that I can come around to, and when I read articles like this, I'm like, well, you know, like what we do kind of come with schools, we come up with a curriculum, right? And we say, okay, here's kind of like what you need to know. This is generally what people agree on. There's other stuff, and go out and search that yourself, but this is kind of what we teach you. Is that what we have to do with ChatGPT? Or do they have to put like a little banner in there that says, okay, this is kind of what the mainstream is, but there's other stuff as well. Could be true, but this is what we think is the more correct information.
Yeah, I actually think
it's just a nightmare.
from what I personally can tell, and as I've said, from my pragmatic critical thinking perspective, I think everyone should make up their own minds about how valuable they see these different things. But from my personal extensive experimentation with ChatGPT 4.0, I would consider it to be closer to the truth, significantly closer to the truth than anything that I read on the BBC website, for example.
Yeah.
So,
but isn't it already throttled? Isn't it already restricted as to what it can say?
It's restricted, and it's biased not only based on the training data, but also based on the restrictions. You can very much see that if you start asking it questions about Joe Biden and then asking the same question about Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Whereas it'll just do stuff with Joe Biden, and then you say do it with Trump, and it's like, I'm not a political blah blah blah, and I don't want to create polarizing. You know what I mean? Yeah. They've actually made it a little bit better, I've noticed. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they've reeled back a little bit on that kind of bias, but it seems like they've actually tried to make it a little bit more balanced, which I find interesting. But it's certainly more balanced than the media. There's definitely, I'm personally certain of that. You have to find out these things for yourself, though. That's the whole point of critical thinking.
That's what I'm pushing back on. I'm like, most people don't have that time. They're just working long hours, and it's like, how much time should you invest in that?
I agree.
Yeah.
And I'm not even saying that people should, but if you don't, just accept that you're being bullshitted to and you're being manipulated, and that's it. But if you're not prepared to accept that, then you have to push back and be a critical thinker. But if you don't have the time or whatever, then look, whatever you think you believe, it's just what someone else has told you.
But say, if you don't believe kind of like in mainstream media and you go to an alternative source of media, how do you know that they're not bullshitting you as well?
They are. Everyone is.
So you just kind of so basically you just kind of have got to accept that you're being bullshitted in some respect wherever you get your information from.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you just kind of have to accept.
You deal with that.
Accept that and deal with that.
Yeah.
In however much time that you have you want to do.
This is one of the sub skills of being a critical thinker, is considering the source. And when you're considering the source, you want to consider, first of all, the credibility of the source. Now, unfortunately, credibility is highly manipulated. So, for example, someone who has a lot of supposed credibility from Wikipedia, which is based on mainstream media, will, for example, seemingly have a lot of credibility. Now, personally, I tend to balance that by, if someone is called an expert, then I offset that with the idea that actually they might be even worse than that. They might just be they might just be completely controlled, have self-interest, have stocks and shares invested in what they're talking about, which of course, if you were put in the position of being a world-renowned expert in something and you want to make loads of money, the obvious thing to do would be to get your wife or your partner, if you're a woman, get your husband, for example, Nancy Pelosi, to invest in loads of stocks and shares, and then come out and say something that makes those stocks and shares go up. Of course, that's such an easy way of making money. I mean, please, no one could seriously tell me that loads of people don't do that all the time. Of course they do that all the time. So the thing is that, yes, you have to have this skepticism. Mm-hmm. And it's not like, oh, don't trust the mainstream media, go to alternative media. No. Alternative media is bullshitting as well. They're all bullshitting. Everyone's got their bias. Everyone's got their perspective. But the point is just at the very least, be aware of that. And when you consider credibility, it's your idea of credibility. You have to decide how credible things are. And then you can take it one step further and you can go to the sources of the source. So when the BBC, let's say, has an article saying that bacon causes cancer, and they have a quote from, expert PhD Sarah Hillcock, right? Then what you do is you then go to Sarah Hillcock's study and have a look and see how that closes up. Oh, it was a study done with 10 people who live in Chernobyl who got cancer. Oh, right. Well, maybe it wasn't bacon. It's like I get that takes a lot of time, and I get that most people are not going to do that, and that's fine. But at least accept that what you're being told might not be true in that case.
Yeah.
That's the minimum. You don't have to go out there and become a researcher and look into it.
It seems like that's what a lot of people are trying to do, and it's really,
I hope so,
because you say go look at the study or whatever, and the example you gave is fairly obvious, but a lot of the time it's like, people don't know the difference between randomized control trials and double blind, and like surveys.
We should teach that.
We should definitely teach that. It should have that basis. But then what we do is we have people that are really interested in it, that get PhDs and spend their time and become experts, and that we should be able to rely on. But as you say, there are incentives that draw people away from that.
And the PhD system and the academic system is a system that when you're in it, you don't want to push too hard against it.
Yeah.
You want to go along with it. You want to get your doctorate. You've paid a lot of money, right? So you don't want to come up with the wrong answers, at least nothing that's something too wrong. That might sound incredibly weird and controversial, especially to people who haven't experienced a master's or a PhD in a university institution. But from my perspective, they don't encourage a lot of independent thought. Actually, they want you to go along with the current agenda, the current studies, the current whatever, and a lot of very base assumptions about even statistical studies, basic things about statistical studies, could actually be challenged, but they're a convention at this point. And nobody's got the time, effort, energy. They don't want to challenge them because it would upset things.
Yeah.
For example, you might have heard of something called p-values. So a p-value is a measure of the probability that the results you obtained are due to random chance.
Yeah.
Right? So basically, I'm trying to think if it's the higher or the lower. Hang on. I believe it's the higher the p-value is, the more chance that it's due to, the more that it's due to random chance, I believe. Yeah. And what they say is that they say that for your results to be, what is the word that they use? They use the word like, statistically significant. Is that it? Maybe that's the one. Yeah. For your results to be considered statistically significant, you have to have a p-value less than or equal to 0.05. What that means is 0.05 is it's 1 in 20, right? So your p-value has to be less than 1 in 20. That means that, and actually, if you look at a lot of studies, a lot of them have that p-value. It's 0.05 or something very close to it, 0.04. That means that we have a load of studies out there where there's a 1 in 20 chance that the results are due to random chance.
Yeah.
What that means is you can run the same experiment 20 times and use one set of results, right, that you randomly got, and say anything you like.
Yeah.
And it be considered statistically significant. There was a very excellent comic about this. I can't remember what the comic's called. Something like XC. You might have seen it, XCD, where they do a study on M&Ms curing cancer.
Oh,
and they say
the
green M&Ms.
I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah, green M&Ms, no correlation. Brown M&Ms, no correlation. Red M&Ms, correlation. And then they go through all the others, and then they say, like the newspaper headline says, like red M&Ms cause cancer. P-value less than or equal to 0.05. Only 1 in 20 chance of being totally random. And of course, they tested 20 different colors of M&Ms. So yes, it was due to random chance. So something like that. I remember when I was learning that, when I was doing my applied linguistics masters, and I was totally blown away.
Yeah.
I was like, what the hell are you telling me? You're telling me that there's studies out there where there's a 1 in 20 chance of it being completely random, and they're calling that scientific fact?
Yep.
Rather than saying, actually, it might be scientific fact, but there's a 1 in 20 chance that it's totally random. They don't say that. And that whole thing, that whole p-value, it was based on like these researchers. I forgot what it was now. They were having a joke about how they could guess something about which tea they'd put sugar in. I can't remember what it was, but it's just really stupid anecdote. Mm-hmm. And that's how they come up with the specific number of p-values. Yeah. And when you even look into that and you find that, you're just like, oh my God, you're kidding me. So it's totally arbitrary. Yeah. The fact that they decided 1 in 20 rather than 1 in 200, for example, it was just based on an arbitrary thing, and they haven't revised it. And then I spoke to the guy who was teaching statistics, who was a PhD. He was a PhD student. He wasn't a professor, right? So he wasn't exactly the best expert in the world. And I said to him, if I get a study that has a p-value of 0.0000001, and I say, and I have another study that's 0.05, can I say that the study with a p-value of 0.00001 is better? And he said, I've never heard of anyone doing that. Really? Because it is better, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've got a p-value that low, you're like, oh, wow, this is definitely not random chance.
Yeah.
That's got to be better than something that's 1 in 20 random chance.
Yeah, and that's why I was trying to emphasize before that it has to be, like if we're thinking critical thinking, we're thinking about, how to deal with information and approximations, is that it has to be something that's repeatable, that there's a general consensus, and it's kind of improving over a longer period of time. Or I suppose just, it's something that has been, it's not just one study, it's like an accumulation of data that we can kind of look at. Because I agree, and I see it all the time. I've been fascinated with nutrition and fitness and stuff like that, and one of the things that always annoys me is, especially if you look to social media, actually mainstream media as well. BBC do it all the time. It annoys the shit out of me. New study: eating 1,000, putting 1,000 grapes of your bum, takes 5 years. Adds 5 years.
Extends to your life by 5 years.
Yeah, and it's like one study. Like, oh come on. Yeah. So, and a lot of the time it's like, I've spent a lot of time reading books, and I've just read Peter Attia's Outlive. And nice. You keep coming to this conclusion where I'm
longevity.
Do you know when I went to school and they said, just eat a balanced diet and get a bit of exercise? I'm like, that's kind of more or less it. I mean, but it's obviously way more complex. But it kind of really is just that.
I don't know, man.
It really is. It's just kind of like, don't eat more than you should. Like, make sure you got protein, make sure you got fiber, get your nutrients.
I've always thought that there's an overemphasis on carbohydrates, though.
But it's just, choose your energy source. Do you want it to come from fats? Do you want it to come from carbs? Do you really think it's a good idea to just get it from one? Maybe your body would function better if it had both. Options. It makes sense, right? When you're thinking, critical thinking, you're like, the more options that I have to stay alive, the better. Yeah. So and then I'm like, I waste so much time, but it doesn't kind of feel like wasted time because I feel informed. But then I'm like, I could have done a lot of different things with that time. But I don't think we're going to put this to rights. Rich. I don't think I feel like we're just kind of going round in circles,
I
and
don't feel like that. I think we've
yeah,
established. I think we're establishing it. I think the point
I
is,
think there'll be more conversations. Yeah,
oh, definitely pragmatism, critical thinking,
yeah,
and then some sort of statistical teaching as well. We've both read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman,
yeah.
an excellent book, and you can find our affiliate link down below in the description for 5% off. No guarantee you'll get 5% off, but use our affiliate link. And it's an excellent book that teaches you some of the principles of statistics. Things like that people should be learning. People should learn about p-values. They should learn how to interpret statistical data. And they should also learn that statistics are just, statistics. It's not absolute truth, but there is kind of a scale of things which are statistically more true and more significant and more likely to be true, and also things like single variant analysis versus multivariant analysis. Single variant analysis is a really ridiculously stupid thing to do. If you're only measuring one
It's true.
variable, right? Yeah, it's exactly like you go along, you go,
But it
oh, these,
informs the bigger picture.
well, does it? You say, these people are living until they're 80. These people are living until they're 60. Let's have a look at how much bacon they eat. And
Yeah,
that's
but
it.
I'm saying,
The
like,
fuck?
you can say, well, mate, if something comes up with that and it shows a statistical difference, then you might look at it along with like meat, or if it's something stupid where you don't really see much of a difference, then you can push that to a side, right? I That's how I always kind of saw it. Not just like it's gonna make a big difference. It's just kind of like eliminating a stupid possibility.
Okay, yeah. You mean if there's no difference, then you can say, oh, well, bacon doesn't factor into it because they all
Yeah,
eat loads of
yeah.
bacon.
Or
Yeah, that's
it
possible.
maybe all
Yeah,
right that. Or you could go, it does factor into it, but so does this, and this, and this. And then when you
yeah,
got all the variants together, you can kind of
yeah.
categorize them, group them, and see if there's any link between all of them or what have you. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just like picking apart the bricks to see how good the house is.
I,
What the
I
fuck is
sense you
that
kind of want to
analogy?
wrap up. So
I
I can kind
do.
of,
I do.
yeah, I can kind of bring things to a
Yes.
bit of a summary. So to go back to it, so the whole thing that we were coming to here was the truth of ChatGPT,
Yeah.
which is one of the major, if not the biggest criticism it comes onto. People also
Hmm.
talk about privacy issues and copyright issues and blah 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 blah. But the most critical issue is this issue of truth, and I think where I would go with that is it doesn't just apply to ChatGPT, it applies to everything. And it particularly applies to a lot of the things that you might think or of as true, whether consciously or subconsciously, whether you've considered it or not. A lot of the stuff that you have in your head that you think of as being true, if you start to look at it, you'll find that there are problems with it. So the point is that if you value that and you want to have you want to have as much truth as possible, then you have to have some capability to critically think and assess things,
Hmm.
which is, I think, is a skill that we should teach in school.
Hmm.
And we should teach facets of that, such as what is the scientific method and how do you do it?
Hmm.
What is statistical analysis and what are the basic principles of critically thinking and analyzing statistical analysis,
Hmm.
right? Like, for example, there's some bizarre statistic about psychological studies. Something like 90% of 90% of the people, the participants of psychological studies, are university students,
Yeah.
and something like 90% of them are from the psychology department. So the subset of humans in psychology that's most studied is psychology students.
Students. Yeah.
Brilliant. So all of the information that
Don't
we
see a
have,
problem with that.
or
Don't see what you're talking about.
the vast majority of the studies and information that we have about psychology might only fucking apply to people who go to university and study psychology, for all we fucking know. So the point is, being aware of things like this helps you at least to have some skepticism rather than just blindly accepting things as truth. And then, kind of getting on your high horse and saying, oh, these religious people who believe all their religious things, I've got my science. It's like, do you really know what fucking science is?
Yeah.
Like, maybe you should take a look at that and actually look into it before you start saying stuff like that. At least come along and say, this is probably true and this probably isn't. But ultimately, I have to accept that I might believe a lot of things and think that they're super true, but they're not.
Yeah.
Because all throughout human history, that's what humans have fucking done. They've thought this is the absolute truth. There's no way that this isn't true. And then 50 years later, we find out it's total bollocks. And we laugh at our previous generations. Oh, what idiots. They thought the world was flat. Fucking morons, right? And then here we are that's like, yeah, but, definitely... the planets definitely move around the sun due to this thing called gravitational force. Yeah, that's absolutely, we're 100% certain about that, and we're definitely not going to be proven wrong that actually it's something else in the future. For example, just a random example, right? Yeah. So ChatGPT, what it says isn't always true. That's just like everything else in the universe, son. Yeah. So, deal with it. Yeah.
Is this where we're leaving it? Deal with it.
And I'll tell you another thing. At WrestleMania 27, I'm gonna lay the smackdown on your candy ass.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't really know. I don't really have any particular answers. I don't feel like maybe I need to have any particular answers with regards to ChatGPT. I think the basics that we can say is it's here, and if in terms in an educational context, it has to be dealt with. You have to assume that it's being used by your students, if not in the classroom, definitely outside the classroom, and you have to account for that and change the way that you teach, and most definitely the way that you assess going forward. Otherwise, you're going to get caught with your pants down. So
yep, that's right.
We say lean into it, utilize it, teach with it, teach students how to use it in a proper manner. We'll leave you to decide what that is at this current time. And if you have any further thoughts on anything and all that we've talked about in this podcast, please leave a comment below, and we'll be doing another Crumbs in the Sheet next month. If you have any topics you all want us to cover or want us to keep going on about this, which we would love to, we could do this for weeks, years. Just throw down the gauntlet.
Hopefully we're going to have a GPT industry expert after I said all that stuff about not trusting experts or being critical of it. We're going to have an industry government expert, actually, a UK government expert on the channel at some point. Once he pulls his finger out and comes on, then we will be having.
It's very exciting. Very exciting. And to make sure that when that interview goes live, you have to subscribe, right? You have to like, comment, and share.
Subscribe, hit the notification bell, go to all notifications, and then send in your PayPal donations.
There you go,
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank
Good
you.
luck.
If you're looking for more information from myself, you can go to teamteacherchina.com. We've got a whole bunch of materials, PowerPoints that you can use instantly in the classroom. We've got a Team Teacher China YouTube channel where we have videos teaching you how to use those materials. Team Teacher English, where we put those materials into a video form for self-study. And Team Teacher Baby, where I take my experience as a teacher and put that into parenting.
And go to youtube.com/Professor Rich to see some English teaching. You can catch me weekly live streams on Oxford Online English YouTube channel. Oh, and also you can do a YouTube search for POG space UK, and you would get my alpha version of my new gaming channel, which actually just have some trial content on there at the moment. You can email us here at eltunderthecovers@gmail.com if you have anything you'd like to contribute to the show.
Smash that like button, share and subscribe.
And watch 100% of the video and don't click off. Thank you.
Bye.